It's 8 p.m. this side, and I'm glad that the Lord has allowed us to see each other and to study the Bible together. Shall we close our eyes for a word of prayer before we begin? Father in heaven, we thank you so much for your love and grace. Please be with us in our study. May your angels strengthen me, and may you give me courage and strength, clarity of thought, and let not the enemy intercept the internet connection. Help us, O Lord, to have this study beautifully done under the power of the early rain in preparation for the latter rain. Abide with us and bless us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen.
Last time we were studying about Sunday law, part 1. We dealt with how the Sunday law is going to be enacted. We also dealt with the different phases of the Sunday law movement of the 4th century, the Sunday law movement of the 18th century, the lessons that we're learning from them. And some of these lessons will be developed even further in our study for today. We basically studied also about the counterfeit revival, the miracles, the deceptions, and many other things that are happening in our time. So I'd like us to go to the next slide. So I'm not sure, I don't feel, okay. I was just about to say I don't feel right with using the slide on my side. So Sarah's gonna help me out with that. So we can go to the first slide. Let's go to the first slide. And in the first slide, what we are seeing there is the chart. You have the last day events chart that I sent to you. And like we spoke about Sunday laws, you have the first phase of the Sunday law, the second phase, the third phase, and the fourth phase. And the first phase would be a Sunday rest laws. I'll give you more detail about that with current events. And then the second phase would be another form of a rest law, but it's more of respect Sunday, honor Sunday. And then the third phase would be worship on Sunday and disregard the Sabbath. And then you have the fourth phase that says you need to worship on Sunday or else we'll kill you, the death decree. And as you see just below the Sunday law, you can see the loud cry there. And then underneath that, you have the latter rain. So you have the latter rain, which gives power to the loud cry. And all these events are happening during the first, second, and third phases of the Sunday law. As you see that, the other presentations will cover on the loud cry and the latter rain. But in the previous class, we did the first phase of the Sunday law, as well as the second phase of the Sunday law. We are still to transition to the third phase of the Sunday law. And in the first phase, we basically said that there's going to be this Sunday rest law. We looked at an example of a Sunday rest law that was given in the 19th century with Senator Blair's bill, the Sunday rest law bill. And then that was a sample of how the Sunday rest law was going possibly to be. And after that, we looked at the counsels that Ellen White gave on the work that could be done during the first two phases of the Sunday law. And today we are transitioning now towards the third phase of the Sunday law. And I would like us to move on to the next slide, which is talking about natural disasters. You see, natural disasters are very important when it comes to last day events. Because Ellen White tells us, and also the Bible, they communicate that they will increase in frequency and magnitude. Remember the illustration we used about, we used that illustration about the woman who goes into child labor and the birth pains, and that being an example of last day events. So natural disasters are also going to increase in magnitude as well as intensity. And we are seeing the pandemics that have been coming, and the coronavirus, as you will see, the link that is being made between natural disasters and Sunday laws towards the end of this presentation. Ellen White says these very important statements that I'll read now, and I want you to keep them in mind as we move on through this presentation to the last part. Satan works through the elements also to garner his harvest of unprepared souls. One of the things that Satan does with natural disasters is to destroy people before they are ready for sealing their destiny. With wildfires, with earthquakes, it can happen to any person. It can happen anywhere at any time. So that's why we need to be ready at any time. Because Satan can keep you unprepared and then bring a natural disaster to destroy you right there and then. He has studied the secrets of the laboratories of nature, and he uses all his power to control the elements as far as God allows. And that's very interesting. That the natural disasters that we are seeing, including the coronavirus pandemic, God has permitted it to come. And God is going to allow Satan to bring these things. And she continues to say, he will bring disease and disaster until populous cities are reduced to ruin and desolation. So Satan's going to bring disease. I think coronavirus is one of the diseases coming from Satan, and it's killing many, many people. I was just looking at the numbers today of how many people died in the United States, about more than 18,000 people who died, until he's reducing it. Why is he killing so many people? He wants to catch them unprepared. That's his own agenda. As long as I kill them unprepared, I know they are in my kingdom. And then she says, even now he's at work in accidents and calamities by land, by sea and by land, in great conflagrations, in fierce tornadoes and terrific hailstorm, in tempest, floods, cyclones, tidal waves, and earthquakes. In every place and in 1,000 forms, Satan is exercising his power. These visitations are to become more and more frequent and disastrous. Destruction will be upon man and beast. So Ellen White gives us very interesting insights here that the natural disasters we are seeing are going to worsen as time progresses. And they're going to increase in intensity and desire. And the purposes and the power behind the natural disasters is Satan. He has an agenda to kill people that are not prepared. And he has a second major agenda behind the natural disasters. What is the agenda of the enemy behind the natural disasters? She says in the next statement, the saints will be blamed as the reason or the cause of these natural disasters. Property and life are destroyed by fire and flood. Satan resolves to charge this upon those who refuse to bow to the idol Sabbath which he has set up. His agents point to Seventh-day Adventists as the cause of the trouble. These people stand out in defiance of the law, they say. They desecrate Sunday. Were they compelled to obey the law for Sunday observance, there would be a cessation of these terrible judgments. Maranatha 176. That's very, very interesting. What's interesting is that Satan is going to blame the saints for natural disasters. But when will the blame come upon the saints? Let's read the statement again. Satan resolves to charge this upon those who refuse to bow to the idols which he has set up. So there's a specific idol that Satan has set up, and that idol is Sunday. Because
Hello? Okay. Yeah, I was just about to say that that's a good thing that you guys are praying. I need lots of prayer. The more I prepare these presentations and I present them, I see the enemy fighting in ways I've never seen him before. And this is one of his other tools. But God is powerful, and all things work together for good. So we are still on the point of the saints being blamed as the cause of the trouble. On the statement that says Satan is going to set up an idol, and the statement says these people stand out in defiance of the law, they desecrate Sunday. So Sunday here is a law according to the statement that was erected, is an idol, and the saints are being blamed. So I understand the statement to be applying to the time after the first and second phase of the Sunday law. increase in magnitude, and the saints are being blamed for that. And you can imagine if somebody has like gotten a mortgage from the bank and built a nice home or business, apartments and whatever, and then they lose everything and you are the one to be blamed for it. What kind of anger will they be manifested? That will be manifested against you. You know? If there could be found one person who has done that, people will be very angry with the person. So, and that is what Ellen White is communicating here. So we move on to the next slide. We see a house that is collapsing here. If somebody lost his parent or his mother there, and you are the one to be blamed for that, it's not going to be easy for Seventh-day Adventists in the near future. And it's not getting easier either for us in our time. Let's move on to the next slide. Which basically is the title of it says leads to third phase of national Sunday law. Satan puts his interpretation upon events, and they, leading men, think as he would have them, that the calamities which fill the land are a result of Sabbath Sunday breaking. Thinking to appease the wrath of God, these influential men make laws enforcing Sunday observance. So you can see that in the previous statement, they said these people are living in defiance of a law. If they could be compelled to worship on Sunday, these things are going to cease. And this interpretation on the events is coming from Satan. She continues to say, they think that by exalting this false rest day higher and still higher, compelling obedience to the Sunday law, the spurious Sabbath, they are doing God's service. Those who honor God by observing the true Sabbath are looked upon as disloyal to God, when it is really those who thus regard them who are themselves disloyal, because they are trampling underfoot the Sabbath originated in Eden. So Maranatha 176. So she says that the natural disasters, the reason why Satan is causing them is so that he could give an interpretation that the saints are to blame. It is because of Sunday desecration. That's why the natural disasters are coming. I know that is very, very familiar, but we want to connect that with the third phase of the Sunday law. Moving on to the next slide, Testimonies to Ministers, page 37. She says the whole world is to be stirred with enmity against Seventh-day Adventists, because they will not yield homage to the papacy by honoring Sunday, the institution of this anti-Christian power. So just reflecting on that, the whole world is to be stirred with enmity. So when you stir something, especially with to hate something, there should be a series of events that you want to use to paint Seventh-day Adventists as very, very bad people. And in other statements, as we will see, before kings and rulers in the little time of trouble, Ellen White says, by pen, voice, and also wealth, genius will all be combined against God's people. So the newspapers will be there, like listing Seventh-day Adventists, painting them as the most diabolical people. So that will be the stirring of the people and instilling in them hatred against Seventh-day Adventists. And the reason why that will be done is because they will refuse to worship on Sunday. It is the purpose of Satan to cause them to be blotted from the earth, she continues to say, in order that his supremacy of the world may not be disputed. So we are seeing that there will be anger that will be aroused against God's people, Seventh-day Adventists. And not only that, we understand that this anger will be coming partly from the natural disasters. They'll be blamed for participating in that. And as we are seeing the connection, we see that Seventh-day Adventists are going to be in a tight corner, and this is going to lead them to the third phase of the Sunday law. The third phase of the Sunday law will come, and that's what we are looking at now, worship on Sundays. So in the next slide, the third stage. So connecting the first two phases of the Sunday law and the third stage, you will see that Seventh-day Adventists are being blamed, and then there's another law that is enacted, or other penalties that are attached to the previous laws. That basically says you must worship on Sunday, And Ellen White gives us more insights about this specific law. And when you go to Revelation chapter 13, verse 15, what we are seeing is that he's causing all to worship the beast and receive his mark. So when you cause a child to eat, you are forcing them to eat. So there's this element of force. And this force comes, and the Bible says, causes all to worship and to receive its mark. So you have this concept of worshiping and the mark connected. And that's something that I really want to explain. Let me just read this verse. Let me not rush through it. Revelation chapter 13, verse 15. A very important connection there between worship and the mark of the beast. And he had power to give life to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak. We understood in verse chapter 13, verse 14, that there will be miracles that will be done, and the world will be deceived to make an image to the beast. And we said the image of the beast would be the unity of church and state in the United States of America, and that unity will come through Sunday laws in its first phase. And then the image to the beast is given life. Being given life, I parallel that with the second phase of the Sunday law. And then the third phase of the Sunday law is here, where the world is now caused to worship the image of the beast. In verse 15, he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, and that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Ellen White makes it very clear that a nation speaks through its legislation. So when the image of the beast speaks here, we are seeing another enactment of a law, and this law will be the one that says you must worship the beast. And this beast here, described as being worshipped, is the first beast, is the papacy. So what act will there be that shows that you are worshiping the papacy? One thing that you need to understand about worship in the Bible is that obedience is another form of worship. That's why in Matthew chapter 4, when Jesus was tempted to worship Satan, Christ responded by saying, "You shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shalt thou serve." So worship and obedience obedience is the highest form of worship, put it in another way. So you show that you worship the papacy when you obey the papacy. And that's why it says that you worship the beast, and you also receive the mark of the beast later on in the verse 16 and 17. So this worshiping of the beast, the speaking of this image of the beast here, apostate Protestants now influencing political leaders to enact a law that says the people must worship on Sunday. When they worship on Sunday, then they are worshiping the beast and also the dragon. They are giving allegiance to the papacy. So that is what I wanted to explain, the connection there. And then we continue on to the next slide, where Ellen White gives us more insight into the space of the Sunday law. Review and Herald, April 6, 1911. It says, "At present, Sunday keeping is not the test. The time will come when men will not only forbid Sunday work, but they will try to force men to labor on the Sabbath and to subscribe to Sunday observance or forfeit their freedom and their lives. But the time for this has not yet come, for the truth must be presented more fully before the people as a witness." He says that present Sunday keeping is not the test. We understand this. It will become more clearer as we look at the historical background behind it. We looked at the Sunday law in the 19th century, and we discovered that, of course, there were Sunday closing laws, the blue laws, that I'll talk about a little bit later in this presentation, which were basically saying you need to not work on Sunday at your own homes. And she's basically saying that the time will come when men will not only forbid Sunday work, but they will try to force men to labor on the Sabbath, number one. Number two, to subscribe to Sunday observance or forfeit their freedom and their lives. So here, the third phase of the Sunday law will not only be saying you need to worship on Sunday. According to Ellen White, is going to say you must work on the Sabbath. You need to break the Sabbath, and also you need to worship on Sunday. Now, there's something very important I need to emphasize here. In the previous statements, we talked about the fact that when the Sunday law says, you need to rest on Sunday, don't do any work, the counsel of Ellen White is that you should not work on Sunday in that. The kind of work you can do is the one that is consistent with the law, such as doing Bible studies, doing medical missionary work, preaching, doing evangelism. And there's nothing wrong with speaking publicly against Sunday laws and sharing with the world the problems of Sunday laws. There's nothing wrong with that. But once we get to the third stage of the Sunday law, then things start transitioning. You are now forced to go to a church and worship with people on Sunday. That becomes very different, where you need to treat Sunday like you are treating the Sabbath. And that is where the problem will be, but it will become clearer as the presentation continues. Let's move on to the next phase, the next slide. Testimonies, volume 5, page 213. The decree has been passed by the highest earthly authority that they shall worship the beast and receive his mark under pain of persecution and death. So you have here worshiping the beast and receiving his mark under pain of persecution and death. May God help his people now. But what can they do in such a fearful conflict without his assistance? Then in the next statement, Testimonies to Ministers, page 133, she says, John was called to behold a people distinct from those who worship the beast or his image by keeping the first day of the week. The observance of this day is the mark of the beast. It's very important to understand what the mark of the beast is. Once you treat Sunday just like you treat the Sabbath, you don't do any work on Sunday and you worship on Sunday, then you are observing the first day of the week. But after the law has been passed, the third phase of the Sunday law, then when you do that to Sunday, then you are receiving the mark of the beast by choice. So that's why she says the observance of this day is the mark of the beast. When you do worship on this day, you are now receiving the mark of the beast. Moving on to the next slide. She says, this is very interesting because it was penned during the time of the 19th century Sunday law crisis that was looming in America. A great crisis awaits the people of God. Very soon our nation will attempt to enforce upon all the observance of the first day of the week as a sacred day. You see now the difference. In the first two phases of the Sunday law, you are just told to rest on Sunday. Don't do any work on Sunday. And now in the third phase is where the nation is going to force you to treat Sunday like you are treating the Sabbath. Not to do any work and also to worship on that day. So in doing this, they will not scruple to compel men against the voice of their own conscience to observe the day the nation declares to be the Sabbath. When it says worship on Sunday, what it really means is that you should treat Sunday as a sacred day, as a holy day, and you need to worship on that specific day and not on any other day. So you will be forbidden to worship on Sabbath. You will actually be forced to work on Sabbath and to worship on Sunday, to treat it as a sacred day. This distinction is very important for us to understand how you receive the mark of the beast. Great Controversy 605. While the observance of the false Sabbath in compliance with the law of the state, contrary to the fourth commandment, will be an avowal of the allegiance to a power that is in opposition to God. I want to pause there and digest what we are reading. the observance of the fall Sabbath in compliance with the law of the state. So there will be a law that says you need to worship on Sunday. That law should be contrary to the fourth commandment. So what will be in the law that will be contrary to the fourth commandment? When the law says you must break the Sabbath, you need to work on Saturday and not rest and not even worship on Saturday. That is how the law is going to be contrary to the fourth commandment. Will be an avowal of allegiance to a power that is in opposition to God. The keeping of the true Sabbath in obedience to God's law is an evidence of loyalty to the Creator. While one class, by accepting the sign of submission to earthly powers, receive the mark of the beast, the other, choosing the token of allegiance to divine authority, receive the seal of God. Very important statement that we need to explain. That here it's very clear. Once the law says worship on Sunday and you actually comply with the law and you worship on Sunday, then you receive the mark of the beast. And once the law says worship on Sunday and you refuse, they tell you to work on Sabbath and you refuse to work on Sabbath, and you don't want to worship on Sunday, you want to observe the Sabbath, that's when God's people are going to go through persecution. And we'll talk about persecution, the little time of trouble, what's going to happen. But here in this presentation, we just wanted to have these finer details, the skeleton and the flesh in between, to understand the word.
Lago, can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
You were breaking, Loaho, but I think you're back.
Hey, Lago,
Okay.
I want to know, do you feel like this is going to be mandated to attend church? Or how do you think the observance of the first day, how do you think they're going to mandate this? Is it church attendance, do you think?
I believe that it is the element of church attendance, because you are supposed to treat it as a sacred day. And when you really look at the Sunday Blue laws that we're going to look at, attend church and listen to a sermon on Sunday. That's how the Blue laws were. I will talk about the Blue laws just after I cover the death decree. Maybe let me refer an answer to that, because I see a relationship between the Blue laws in America and how the worship on Sunday may play out in the future. We don't know how it's going to come out clearly, but what we are seeing is that in order for the state to ensure that you worship on Sunday, there may have to be compulsion of some sort for you to be in actual attendance of a worship service on Sunday. So that there is that allegiance that is given to say. So I will show with you some of the Blue laws that are in this presentation actually. So that is how I would respond to it briefly. Moving on to the next slide, which is the fourth stage of the Sunday law, Revelation 13 verse 16. And I'll read it. Revelation chapter 13 verse 16. It says, "And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. And that no man might buy or sell, save he that hath the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name." And when you go back to verse 15, "And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed." So here you have this concept of being killed as a result of not obeying. And this death decree does not come at the third phase of the Sunday, it comes a little bit later. And in the Spirit of Prophecy, it makes that very, very clear. Spirit of Prophecy, volume 4, page 444. In the last conflict, the Sabbath will be the special throughout. Secular rulers and religious leaders will unite to enforce the observance of the Sunday. And as milder measures fail, the most oppressive laws will be enacted. So you see that there are milder measures to try and encourage people to worship on Sunday. And once that fails, then oppressive laws will be enacted. It will be urged that few who stand in opposition to an institution of the church and the law of the land ought not to be tolerated. And a decree will finally be issued denouncing them as deserving of the severest punishment and giving the people liberty after a certain time to put them to death. Romanism in the old world and apostate Protestantism in the new will pursue a similar course toward those who honor the divine precepts. Key points here. The last conflict will be on the Sabbath issue, and there will be two types of rulers in the end of time. You have secular rulers, civil rulers, and religious leaders. And all of them are in unison, trying to force people to observe Sunday and worship on Sunday. And they will try milder measures, and if this don't succeed, there will be more oppressive laws. And some of these oppressive laws would include not buying or selling and things like that. It will be urged that the few who stand in opposition to an institution of the church, so if this worship as if it's something that is enforced by the church. And what church will that be? Ellen White gives us more insight there in the same statement. She says apostate Protestantism in the New World, in the United States, will be the one, and Romanism in the Old in Europe. So that is what we are seeing right there. And in the next statement, more interesting things develop. Oh, okay, I need to make this point before we move on. She says, and giving the people liberty after a certain time to put them to death. So the death decree will come later as one of the last measures to try and force these people to worship on Sunday. But many people will still be dying even before the death decree. Actually, after the death decree, as you will see in our studies, none of God's people are going to die. Early writings, page 36 and 37 in the next PowerPoint. In the next slide. The plagues enraged the wicked against the righteous. So they thought that we had brought the judgments of God upon them, and that if they could rid the earth of us, the plagues would then be stayed. A decree went forth to slay the saints, which caused them to cry day and night for deliverance. This was the time of Jacob's trouble. Very interesting statement here. We are seeing the plagues being mentioned as enraging the wicked. And I think we're all familiar with the fact that there will be a close of probation when Michael stands up. And after the close of probation, we are going to have the 7 last plagues falling one after the other. So as the plagues fall, especially after the second plague in this statement, Ellen White tells us that a decree now goes forth as a result of receiving the plagues. So the death decree, actually, according to the spirit of prophecy, will come after the close of probation. A decree went forth to slay the saints, which caused them to cry day and night for deliverance. This was the time of Jacob's trouble. So once the death decree is passed, which happens after the close of probation, then that marks the beginning of Jacob's time of trouble, as you see in this statement. All those things we'll study when we get to the great time of trouble in our class. And in the next slide, we are seeing Ellen White giving us this as a landmark to mark the time when we need to now leave the villages and to mountains and caves. The few that will still be left. Early Writings 282, she says, I saw the saints leaving the cities and the villages and associating together in companies and living in the most solitary places. Angels provided them with food and water, while the wicked were suffering from hunger and thirst. Then I saw the leading men of the earth consulting together, and Satan and his angels busy around them. I saw a writing copies of which were scattered in different parts of the land, giving orders that unless the saints should yield their peculiar faith, give up the Sabbath, and observe the first day of the week, the people were at liberty after a certain time to put them to death. But this hour of trial, the saints were calm. But in this hour of trial, the saints were calm and possessed, trusting in God and leaning upon his promise that a way of escape would be made to them. I will continue there. Let's just stop there and digest what we just read. So the saints are leaving the cities and the villages. The few that are left are now leaving the cities and the villages, and they are associating together in small companies, and they are moving on to the mountains. And what we are learning now is that the angels are going to provide them with food and water. And while the wicked are suffering from hunger and thirst, that's very interesting. What would cause the wicked to be thirsty and hungry will be the plagues that are going to hit this earth, the 7 last plagues, as well as the natural disasters and catastrophes that are there. So the saints will have food and water. And as you will see when we discuss the great time of trouble, Ellen White specifically mentions bread and water in other statements. But in this one, she mentions food. Then she says here, she started seeing as the saints are moving out now, the death decree is passed. She sees the writing copies of it were scattered in different parts of the land, giving orders that after a specific time, the saints should be killed. So this is the death decree. And then we continue reading. In some places, before the time for the decree to be executed, the wicked rushed upon the saints to slay them. But the angels in the form of men of war fought for them. Satan wished to have the privilege of destroying the saints of the Most High, but Jesus bade his angels watch over them. God would be honored by making a covenant with those who had kept his law. In the sight of the heathen round about them, Jesus would be honored by translating, without their seeing their death, without seeing death, the faithful waiting ones who had long expected him. So from this statement, we are seeing that Satan is trying to destroy God's people after the death decree, but Jesus will not allow him to. So they are trying to throw swords at God's people. They just fall down as straw. And probably they'll try to shoot God's people, but the bullets will not be going anywhere. So God will be protecting his people. So no righteous person is going to die after the death decree. But there will be many righteous people who are going to die as martyrs before the death decree is passed, through persecution, through natural disasters, and many other things, as will be made clear in our class on the little time of trouble that will be coming. So that is the phases of the Sunday law. So you have the Sunday rest law, you have honor Sunday, and then you have worship on Sunday, and then you have the death decree. It's important to note here that after the third phase of the Sunday law, you are going to have the close of probation. And after the close of probation, you're going to have the death decree. So that clarification I needed to bring across. And I'll be coming back to these phases when I discuss the loud cry, when I discuss the latter rain, when I discuss the seal and the mark, and also country living. I'm going to discuss that, and it will be in line with these phases. These phases are like significant time blocks that are indicating significant changes that are taking place on the earth. That's why I was slowing down my pace so that we can be clear on what's happening here. Now I'm going to now speak about the American Blue Laws, the American Sunday Blue Laws. And as I'm looking at my time, I don't want to rush through this. I really want us to understand this. And I'm going to take my time and cover whatever we can today. And if there's a need for a makeup class, we can talk about that. So this was the first American Sunday blue law. In the next slide, every man and woman shall repair in the morning to the divine service and sermons preached upon the Sabbath day, which is Sunday, and in the afternoon to divine service and catechizing upon, paying for the first fall to lose their provision and their allowance for the whole week following, for the second to lose the said allowance and also be whipped, and for the third to suffer death. So one thing that's interesting about this Sunday law, it's a call for people in the morning to go and listen to a sermon on Sunday. And if you fail to attend a worship on Sunday, according to this law, you will lose your said provision and allowance for the whole week. So some of these people during that time of the colonial period were getting paid weekly. So you will not be paid. And if you still violate this law, you would lose that payment and you're also going to be whipped. And if on the third Sunday or the third offense, you're still continuing, then you are to be killed. That's very interesting how that law is written. And then you have this next one, the Massachusetts Sunday Law of 1650. Further be it enacted that whosoever shall profane the Lord's day by doing any servile work or any such like abuses shall forfeit for every such default 10 shillings or be whipped. So here it speaks about the fact that you are not allowed to work. The previous one had this concept of forced worship. This one has this forced rest that is emphasized here. And then you have the California Penal Code Section 300. This is a very interesting one that also had Seventh-day Adventists in trouble. It reads, every person who keeps open on Sunday any store, workshop, bar, saloon, banking house, or other place of business for the purpose of transacting business therein is punishable by a fine not less than $5 or more than $50. This is a very interesting law in California because in the 1870s, there was a Sunday law movement in the United States. Moving on to the next slide. In the 1870s, state laws received new attention. These state laws were the blue laws that I've been reading about. There are many. I just didn't want to put all of them there. If you would like a copy of the various blue laws that I have, Sunday blue laws, I can send them to you. You can just download them from the internet. So in the 1870s, these blue laws received new attention because there was a Sunday movement that was rising up through the Christian groups that we talked about, the Women Christian Temperance Union, and also the evangelicals that were getting together in America trying to push for Sunday. So they said, well, the Sunday laws are already here, so why don't we just push for them to be enforced? So they started being enforced, and Seventh-day Adventists were seriously affected by these Sunday blue laws. Actually, Ellen White's son, William C. White, was charged for running a printing press on Sunday in Oakland, California. And he was basically charged $50, which he paid because that was the charge. And in 1883, the California Sunday Blue Law was repealed, and more than 150 Seventh-day Adventists were persecuted and charged for violating Sunday laws in the late 1800s. So this was a very big issue, and more than 30 Seventh-day Adventists worldwide were also persecuted, especially in Europe. So, and this is recorded in Light Bearers to the Remnant by Richard Schwartz. He says many more Adventists in Tennessee were convicted of Sunday law violations, placed in chain gangs, and subjected to hard labor. One early 20th century author counted over 107 Day Adventists in the United States and about 30 in foreign countries who were prosecuted for quiet work performed on the first day of the week, resulting in fines and costs amounting to $2,269.69 and imprisonments totaling 1,438 days and 455 days served in chain gangs. So Seventh-day Adventists suffered in the latter part of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century. And this suffering caused a lot of trouble in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. There was so much confusion about what needs to be done, especially with Seventh-day Adventists who were living in the southern states. Some of them really suffered. I mean, there's a record of a couple who stayed out in the country. They were out in the country, and they were growing their own, food, but they had a neighbor who was a Sunday observer. So on Sabbath, they would keep their Sabbath, and then on Sunday, they would work in their garden. And the neighbor called police on them and reported them. And after the neighbor reported them, the police came and they said, well, this lady, your neighbor says you're disturbing her when you're working in your farm on Sunday. So you need to, is this true? So they said, yes, it's true. So the husband was arrested and charged with violating Sunday. And this man was married and had children. So he basically argued that, no, but I am also a Seventh-day Adventist. I cannot be, this lady works on Saturday and she does not disturb my devotion. But they say, yeah, but the law says you cannot disturb hers, and that is subject to the interpretation. So, cut the long story short, after a long time in prison, the man unfortunately died, and the wife suffered a lot trying to raise the kids, and it was very rough for Seventh-day Adventists in those times. So interesting times are coming ahead of us. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to paint a reality check of what happened in the past and what may be happening. And one of the things that caused a lot of confusion in the Seventh-day Adventist circles that finally led Ellen White to write the counsel that we've been quoting from. The question that we find in the next slide is, should not those in the southern field work on Sundays? So that was the question that caught the attention of our church. And the question was posed to Ellen White, is when the Sunday law says we should rest on Sunday, shouldn't we be resting? And Ellen White gave this counsel that I find very important, that will save us unnecessary persecution. Review and Herald, April 6, 1911, paragraph 9, she says, we are not to make efforts to teach the southern people to work on Sunday, because there were some brethren who said, brothers and sisters, if the law says don't work on Sunday, you must work. You know, to violate the law and show them that you will not comply with it. That which some of our brethren have written upon this point is not based upon right principles, she says. When the practices of the people do not come in conflict with the law of God, you may conform to them. And this is a very good counsel, especially when we are dealing with the three phases of the Sunday law. That the way to know whether to comply with the law is the law is complying with the law a violation of the law of God. If not, then comply with it. We are complying with the lockdown system now. We are not saying we are going to force ourselves to go to church no matter who wants what. We are complying with that, and that is consistent with this counsel. If the workers fail to do this, they will not only hinder their own work, but they will place stumbling blocks in the way of those for whom they labor and hinder them from accepting the truth. So she says, if we are zealous and we fight wrong battles, the consequences are that we'll make our work harder. Two, we are going to place stumbling blocks against other people, and then it's going to work against us, basically. And in the next slide, a very important statement comes across. The same article. This article you'll find in Review and Herald, April 6, 1911. I've given you the light which has been presented to me. And she's basically saying, this is not just my idea. It's something that the Lord has shown me. If followed, it will change the course of many and will make them wise, cautious teachers. refraining from work on Sunday is not receiving the mark of the beast. And where this will advance the interest of the work, it should be done. We should not go out of our way to work on Sunday. That's very, very clear. So when the law says rest on Sunday, when you comply with the law, you are not receiving the mark of the beast. It's very different from worshiping on Sunday. And that distinction should be very clear in our minds. This distinction should be very clear in our minds. And this is the time when she gave the counsel. And what counsel was this? That what should you do on Sunday? I read this counsel in the previous Sunday law part 1, but I'll read it here again. On Sunday, this is the very best opportunity for those who are missionaries to hold Sunday schools. Come to the people in the simplest manner possible, telling them of the love of Jesus for sinners and educating them in the scriptures. So she says you need to do Bible studies, you need to call children, do schools with them where you teach them the Bible. And then in the next slide, she says conduct genuine missionary work. After the Sabbath has been secularly observed in places where opposition is so strong as to arouse persecution if work is done on Sunday, let our brethren make that day an occasion to do genuine missionary work. Let them visit the sick and the poor, ministering to their wants, and they will find favorable opportunities to open the scriptures to individuals and to families. Thus, most profitable work can be done for their master. So here she gives very important counsel. And in both of these counsels, we don't find a counsel that says you need to go to church on Sunday and worship with the Sunday keepers on Sunday. There's no counsel that says that. It just says you can give them Bible studies, you can do genuine missionary work. It doesn't say you can now go and worship with them on Sunday in their churches. I thought I should just make that very, very clear. After I have clarified that, I now need to transition. And there's a reason why I showed you some of those blue laws. And there is a case that we find in the next slide. In 1961, something major happened in the history of Sunday laws in the United States. In 1961, the U.S. Supreme Court issued an opinion that settled the question of the constitutionality of state Sunday laws. The opinion came as part of the decision made in a cluster of 4 cases from Maryland, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania. The leading case among the 4 was McGowan versus Maryland, 366 U.S. 420, 1961, which was brought by 7 employees of a large department store prosecuted for selling merchandise on Sunday. And what was the judgment of the justice? The court ruled that Maryland's Sunday law did not violate either the religion clauses of the First Amendment or the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice L. Warren acknowledged that Sunday laws in history originated with religious aims, but he insisted that these laws were no longer religious in character. He found contemporary Sunday laws to be completely secular statutes that apply equally to people of all religions. Now, this is very interesting. What's interesting about this is that when you read those Sunday laws that I read earlier on, it would look like a violation of the First Amendment of the United States. But here, the Supreme Court set precedents and basically argues that they are now constitutional. You can never argue that they are unconstitutional. And that's very interesting because in the 19th century, the same Sunday laws, the same Sunday blue laws are the ones that caused the persecution I was talking about that happened in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. What is even more interesting is that these state Sunday blue laws were the ones that influenced how the Sunday rest law was crafted that was proposed by Senator Blair, that was presented before the Committee on Education and Labor before the U.S. Senate. So that is what we learn about Sunday Blue laws. Now, I know you are sitting on the edges of your seats and trying to digest all this information, but before you settle down, I think I need to now give you an update of what is happening between Sunday laws and natural disaster in the United States. What is going on in the US now? And I'll start with current events. And I would like to emphasize a statement that we read earlier on. In the next slide, it says where to look. Romanism in the old world and apostate Protestantism in the new. So Catholicism will be behind Sunday laws in the old world. What is the old world? Europe. And apostate Protestantism will be behind Sunday laws in the new world. What is the new world? The United States of America. So we need to be looking at Protestants in America and Catholics in Europe when we are looking at this. So in the light of that counsel or statement, we now move on to the next slide. I think we are all familiar with how Donald Trump came into power. We know very well that a significant portion of the evangelicals voted for Donald Trump because he had vowed to give them power. And Donald Trump vowed to close the gap between church and state in August 15, 2016. I said, I'm going to take this into my own hands and I'm going to figure out a way that we can get you back your freedom of speech. Trump told the evangelical pastors, it will be so great for the evangelicals, for the pastors, for the ministers, for the priests, for America. Here, Donald Trump promises to give them freedom of speech. And how did he do that? We are familiar with the executive order that Donald Trump signed that repealed the Johnson Amendment. And we are familiar with the Johnson Amendment. I'm not American, but I think you've read enough about the Johnson Amendment. But just in case somebody who's listening is not familiar, it is one of the brightest lines in the legal separation between religion and politics under the provision, which was made in 1954. Tax-exempt entities like churches and charitable organizations are unable to directly or indirectly participate in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate. Specifically, ministers are restricted from endorsing or opposing candidates from the pulpit. If they do, they risk losing their tax-exempt status. So this was a way in which a law by Johnson was there to regulate that separation of church and state in a way. And it's very interesting what he said, Donald Trump said, President Donald Trump said when he repealed the Johnson Amendment. You have much to contribute to our politics, yet our laws prevent you from speaking your minds from your own pulpits, Trump said, addressing his religious conservative base. An amendment pushed by Lyndon Johnson many years ago threatens religious institutions with the loss of tax-exempt status if they openly advocate their political views. Why is this critical? We are seeing any religious body that may have a political agenda to push for any kind of legalization of anything religious. If the churches in America unite and choose a certain candidate and finance him and campaign on their behalf, chances of that political candidate making it to leadership positions in the United States are very high, especially when you look at the facts of how Donald Trump made it right there. The ones who voted for him are the evangelicals, and the ones who keep him in power are the evangelicals. So, and also Vice President Mike Pence, who is also a strongly social conservative, he also has a very important role in all this. Am I saying the Johnson Amendment is a Sunday law? No, I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that the Johnson Amendment gave so much power to religious bodies in America that will make it easier for them to push whatever agenda that they may have. And more than just the Johnson Amendment, what is interesting is this 2017 July 31 article, Bible Studies at the White House. Who's inside this spiritual awakening? This is in the next slide. And they're basically saying a spiritual awakening is underway at the White House. Some of the most powerful people in America have been gathering weekly to learn more about God's word. And this Trump cabinet, Bible studies making history. So these people are receiving Bible studies at the White House. That's very interesting. As if that's not enough, in the next slide, let's ask who's teaching them. Ralph Drolliger of Capital Ministries told CBN News, these are godly individuals that God has risen to a position of prominence in our culture. And then he says, I don't think Donald Trump has figured out that he has changed himself to the Apostle Paul. So Drolliger considers himself the modern day Apostle Paul that Donald Trump has changed himself to. He started his Bible studies in 40 state capitals, a number of foreign capitals, teaches weekly studies in the U.S. House and State Senate, and now leads about a dozen members of the President Trump's cabinet in weekly studies of the scriptures. It's the best Bible study that I've ever taught in my life. They are so teachable, they are so noble, they are so learned. So Drolliger says that. That's very, very interesting. And then more than just giving them Bible studies, they are praying in the Oval Office for Donald Trump. This was 2017, way back. About 24 evangelical leaders spontaneously prayed in President Trump in the Oval Office Monday morning during a day-long listening session with the Office of Public Liaison. Johnny Moore, a former senior vice president at Liberty University, posted pictures of the prayer time Tuesday night on social media, but emphasized that it was more than just a photo op. So we have that. So the churches are beginning to gain more power through these things. Now, besides this push for more power to be given to the churches, more power to be given to the churches. Now, what is happening with the coronavirus? Could there be a connection between that and what these people are pushing for? Well, I'm not going to speculate. All I'm going to do is read to you articles. In the next slide, you'll find a very interesting article written April 1, just 10 days ago, by Lee D. Shade. He says, when the earth demands a Sabbath, learning from the coronavirus pandemic. That's a very interesting article. You can find it in www.patheos.com. Just quoting a few excerpts from that. I happen to be teaching an online course on environmental ethics in this midst of this pandemic. So this is a professor on environmental ethics. And he's the one teaching this. I'm reading this in this slide. I hope you're there. The students and I have discussed the ways in which the virus is reshaping how they think about our response to the climate crisis. One of my students, Laura, shared, I was wondering if some of the required changes needed to reduce our energy consumption might be received as more reasonable. In other words, now that many in the US have been encouraged to make drastic changes, such as sheltering in place for entire communities, will our nation be more receptive to changes needed to address the climate crisis? She's hopeful. I believe the power of creativity and innovation, perhaps we can collaborate to help one another while at the same time looking for new ways to help our planet heal. An environmental ethics professor and a student is saying maybe the lockdown is a good idea and it should be considered on a long-term basis. But how? In the other part, it says phrases like planned economic slowdowns, these are the terms they use in their environmental ethics class, intentional degrowth are coming to be in the forefront. For those of us in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we know the Bible was was way ahead of the game with this concept of planned economic slowdown, in quotes. It's called the Sabbath. So they're basically saying what the planet is crying for is for the Sabbath. The planet is tired, we've been overworking it. And that's very interesting. They even quote Leviticus 25. They are saying, not only did God call for a Sabbath on the seventh day, but also stipulated in Leviticus 25 that there should be a Sabbath year. I hope this is not the Sabbath year they're talking about, 2020. They quote Leviticus 25, verse 4 and 5. So basically saying the earth needs a Sabbath. And not only that, it even gets interesting if you move on to the next slide. In fact, God holds God accountable to the same cycle of Sabbath. Then they quote the seventh day Sabbath. The first creation story of Genesis tells us that God took time to rest after heavy lifting of creating the universe. Trust God's. The text here is a bit of a challenge, but reading the other highlighted part on the top right, it says it's worth noting that in Leviticus, God delineates consequences for disobeying the commandments and refusing to honor God and neighbor, including the land itself. And reading the first part of Leviticus chapter 26, the one they've quoted, it says, describes how the people will be blessed when they follow God's commands. The earth will yield abundantly and they will live in peace. But in verses 14 to 33, the consequences for refusing to live in accordance with God's commandments are described in great graphic detail. So what are they saying? They're basically saying the reason why we have coronavirus is because we have not obeyed God's command of keeping the Sabbath. And these are curses. God has cursed this earth. And this is an environmental ethics professor saying this in an article that is published. That's very fascinating that we see there. In the next slide, Pope says coronavirus pandemic could be nature's response to climate crisis. This was April 9, just a few days ago, 2020. And Pope says coronavirus pandemic could be nature's response to climate change. So what does he say? In an email interview published Wednesday in the Tablet and Commonwealth magazines, the pontiff said the outbreak offered an opportunity to slow down the rate of production and consumption and to learn to understand and contemplate the natural world. We did not respond to the partial catastrophes. Who now speaks of the fires in Australia or remembers the 18 months ago, a boat across the North Pole? A boat could cross across the North Pole because the glaciers had all melted. Who speaks now of the floods? The Pope says. So it's basically saying maybe coronavirus will teach us that climate change is real and we need to take it very seriously. It even gets more interesting in the next article. This is a very interesting article written by Joseph Tortilli on April 1, 2020. It says, if history rhymes. I don't have time to read it, but the essence of it is the hope of avoiding long-time lockdown is found in Sabbath. And just reading the last paragraph on the next slide, I'll just read that one because of time. It says, at least one societal change resulting from the quarantine could do wonders to reinvigorate our national sense of family, faith, and community. Let's give a serious thought to reinstating at least some of the time-honored Sunday closure laws. He's talking about Sunday blue laws, sort of 1 day per week modified stay-at-home request. Such action would rededicate our society to a regular day of rest, family meals, civics association, and religious observance. So she's basically saying, they're basically saying, well, why don't we just restore 1 day where everything shuts down? So we don't have to be quarantined and we can control coronavirus and many other things. Skipping the next two, I think we can read that in our own time, slides. And then I want to draw attention to what's happening in Europe, and then we finish. European Sunday Alliance. Are you in that slide? European Sunday Alliance. This is a very interesting Sunday Alliance. I think it was opened around 2008, if I'm not mistaken. And you can go to their website. I have it there on the next slide. It says EuropeanSundayAlliance.eu. And a very interesting organization here. And who are they and what are they up to? Let's read in their website. In the next slide, it says the European Sunday Alliance is a network of national Sunday alliances, trade unions, civil society organizations, and religious communities committed to raise awareness of the unique value of synchronized free time for our European societies. And Sunday and more general, decent working hours are the focus of our campaigns. So they are basically campaigning for Sunday as a day of rest for the rights of the workers. This European Sunday Alliance, I find it interesting when, if you remember very well, in our previous class, we talked about the 19th century Sunday law movement that came through the women temperance movement, that was trying to fight for the rights of the workers, that was trying to fight for the rights of women in labor. So here you have another movement, European Sunday Alliance, that is also doing the similar work that was there. So it's mobilizing a lot of countries to follow what they want. And what's interesting in the next slide is, if you know the map of Europe, you can see all these red countries. This European Sunday Alliance has had influences, amazing influences in Europe. It's the one behind a lot of Sunday rest laws that are in other states in European countries. So that is what we are going into. And what even gets more interesting is that there's the European Confederation of Independent Trade Unions, and in the slide, protect the work-free Sunday. So the essence of all this, what I'm trying to show you, is there's power being given to the churches in America. There are people talking about Sunday as a solution to the quarantine coronavirus issue. There are people in Europe who are seriously pushing for Sunday. And who would argue against this after countries have been quarantined and there are visible results? I mean, you know, the carbon emissions are significantly reducing now, and the earth is becoming more greener. And it seems like this shutdown thing and lockdown thing is working. And if it is really working, why don't we just incorporate it somehow as becoming part of our lives? You don't have to quarantine people for 6 months or 3 months. You just quarantine them 1 day of the week. And that could be a way in which Sunday as a rest day could be coming across in the United States. And what is also interesting is that it seems like the coronavirus pandemic is hitting the US worse. And the numbers keep to be escalating. And actually, I just read the news after the sunset today that the United States death toll has now exceeded Italy, which is shocking to me. And it may be possible that this is one way in which Sunday as a rest day may come. I don't know. I'm just saying possibilities of what may be going on in the world. And I would like us to skip some of those slides because of time. And I want us to jump to the last 2 slides, a revolution after the crisis. This was a very interesting article that came from Forbes, www.forbes.com. And it was written by a man, a very interesting economist, the revolution after the crisis. I'll just read these 2 paragraphs, then I'll give us time to engage. We're on the cusp of a massive economic contraction and a total reset of the global economy. That's very interesting. It's basically saying the global economy is being reset. The coronavirus pandemic has metastasized into a global crisis that experts predict will very likely kill millions and unleash a worldwide economic depression. As economist Noel Robani writes, the sudden shock to the global economy from the COVID-19 pandemic is accelerating a massive collapse that will be more severe than either the 2008 global financial crisis or the Great Depression. So they're saying that the economic collapse that's coming will be worse than what happened in the Great Depression. That's what the economists are predicting. And what's more fascinating is in the next slide. In fact, we are witnessing a restructuring of the global economic order that could lead to an entirely new civilization, building on a range of coordinated social and economic policies that must come. We will also see the rise of a new global system. So it's basically saying among these new policies will be a shift to universal basic income and the rise of a highly automated production infrastructure. It's basically saying a new economic model will have to grow out of this, and a new global system will have to develop out of this. And Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister of the UK, basically said we need to have a new world government to regulate the world after the coronavirus pandemic, which will deal with the situation and help people to survive afterwards. So what's my point? My point is, could this be a reset of the world economy and ushering us into the new world order? I don't know. It's possible. And if it is, we need to be getting ready because the final movements will be rapid ones. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's been long. I know it was a lot to digest, but I'm glad I could bring it to where I wanted us to cover for today. All right. Shall we pray? Father in heaven, we thank you so much for your love and grace. Thank you for your angels and your mercy that endures forever. Your tender mercy, your loving kindness. A God who pities us and remembers that we are dust. We thank you for these classes, the encouragement they've been to me and to those who are listening to them. There's something you want to do through them, and may you help us to cooperate with you so that your purposes are accomplished through this. Abide with us and bless us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.